Guys, I can't be the only one who feels like our generation as a whole is having an identity crisis, right? On the personal level, on the societal level, people in our generation just don't seem to know what they want. They don't seem to know where they're going. They don't seem to know if what they're doing is right or wrong. Maybe it's just a young people thing, and maybe it's something that's been felt throughout history, but I feel like this is the case a lot now in our generation. I feel like the reason behind it likely must be the abundance of information that we have, right? A lot of people do not feel fulfilled or motivated by the concept of working a 9 to 5 every day of the week or year because they know now that you can make money online, they see people doing it. A lot of people do not feel content with living in their town because they can see what other places look like and can offer online. A lot of people feel like a lot of things in the world are wrong. We're more connected than ever, yet we're more apart, and I feel like it's having a lot of bad effects. There are a lot of people who are doing better in this generation because, obviously, like I say, a lot of the means mean that we can. There are a lot of people who seem to be doing worse. Now, in the context of that, why are so many people having an identity crisis? Because we're going to focus today more on the personal. We could obviously talk about the problems with society, and we've done that a lot. We've spoken about the fact that people are not having relationships anymore, like at all, whether we're talking friends or romantic partners. People do not feel fulfilled by a lot of stuff, but let's not talk about that today. Let's speak about more of a personal level. Going off of where we end up at this age, and by the way, guys, I'm 21. If you're watching me for the first time, hello. At my age, everything changes. Everything begins to change between about 21, 22, 23, because everything that we took for granted up until this point is now gone. We're not in school anymore with a predestined path, right? We all know that school is just the path, is what you're doing anyway. You now come to a point where, in this age range, you're likely finishing university yourself, and then you start to think about what it is you're going to do. When we were in school and college and university, what you're going to do was like, just a couple of years down the line, right? So it's like, what are you going to do? I'm going to do an art degree. I'm going to do a master's. When that all ends, the real world kicks in. But a lot of people find themselves at a point in a crossroads where they don't want this path. They don't want the job, they don't want the path that they're in. And also, there is a lot of pressure from outsiders, mainly of the older generation. Now, as young people, all of the young people that I've spoken to, like that are down to earth, reasonable, can acknowledge a lot of the challenges that we face in our generation. This is socially, culturally, this is personally. The fact that a lot of food that is marketed to us, we don't have to have it, but a lot of the food that is marketed to us is bad or unsafe. The fact that social relationships are suffering. The fact that people have less friends. The fact that people get paid less. People don't have girlfriends or boyfriends anymore. These are things that a lot of people can acknowledge, and because a lot of people can relate to at least one of these things. Maybe you've got good friends and good relationships, but maybe you can't afford a house. Maybe you don't see value in your career. And a lot of other young people can sympathise with this concept. I can, right? Some of those issues do not relate to me. Generally, I have good friends, I have good relationships. But, certain things like careers, I don't really find myself particularly attracted to any set career, for example. So we can all relate to something, and that brings us some unity. But at the same time, number one, we're not even mixing with each other. Like I say, people have less friends, less relationships, so we don't even really mix with each other enough to really understand that each other and all of us are on the same path and suffering from the same issues. I think that's one of the things that leaves us feeling like we're behind. A lot of people's only connections these days, and it is a shame, is coming from family. And family connections are great, they're very meaningful, but at the same time, these are likely to be what? Parents, grandparents, people who grew up in a different time in the world. And the amount of people whose family that I know, fortunately for me, mine are not like this, but I know a lot of people whose parents are obviously born in the 70s, the 80s, maybe even the 60s, and growing up and obviously maturing throughout that time period, it was so different. The internet obviously was not a thing. Mobile phones were not a thing. A time where you could walk into a place, hand in a CV or a resume for our American viewers, and possibly get hired. Most places now will not allow you to physically hand in a paper copy of a CV because of like data protection rules, at least in the UK. So that's just one thing, right? That's one example. Again, dating in those times was very different. Property in those times was very different. Jobs in those times meant a different thing. And people might say, if they're from that generation in the comments, oh, we had it harder. Maybe you did, right? I'm not saying you had it easier. I'm just saying it was different. People like to make it a battle of who's suffering the most. I'm not trying to make it that at all. I'm just acknowledging every generation has differences. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when we listen to a generation who grew up in a completely different time, people who were born, again, 20 years after World War II, if they were born in the 60s, right? Or if they're born in the... It depends who we talk about, grandparents, parents. That was a very different time. Look at a car that came out in 1959, right? It's not relatable. It doesn't look like a normal car. Look at a TV from that era. I know these are just weird examples, but it shows how long ago this was. And when these are the people who we're taking advice from, one of two things is going to happen. Number one, we're just going to feel demotivated. Number two, we're going to follow their advice, but not get the same results. Like I say, the concept of, well, just pick yourself up by the bootstraps, walk into a factory and get a job. It's all online, right? And when it's all online, if I walk into a shop and it's me, I'm not saying it to brag, I just have self-belief. I even if it's not true, even if you guys think I'm a loser and a geek, if I really believe in myself and I walk into a shop and I come across the way I want to, I'm dressed nice, I'd have a much higher chance than if I was a blank piece of paper. You can't see what I look like, how I act, where I come across. It's very different getting a job. So when we follow what old people believe in and it doesn't work for us, that's a challenge, right? We find ourselves feeling a lot more lost because so-and-so told us this is the right way to go about things, but it's obviously not working because times are different. That's one of the challenges that I think is leading to an identity crisis because, again, the people that we believe know what's best for us do not. It's not that they don't love us, it's not that they don't want what's best for us, but they just are not of this time. It's one of these conversations that, if you ask me, if I'm looking for advice in the real world, I'm looking to people below the age of 45, maybe 50, because they're going to be a lot more in touch with today's market in the world than a lot of these older people likely will be. That's just one particular example. So what are the other issues that leave people these days having an identity crisis? I think another thing is the reflection on how people have lived up until this point. You know, traditionally, in these times, you know, the 50s, the 70s, even probably the 80s and that era, the people at our age, 21, 25, could have been in their own house, could have had a family, a kid by now, maybe two, maybe three, maybe a wife or a husband. And that's got nothing to do with money, right? People like to make this well, you guys can't afford a house because you're not working 100. It's not that, guys, right? A lot of people now don't need a house. Because think about it. The traditional idea of buying a house works when you've got 2 kids and a wife. When you're single, it doesn't make any sense. So that's part of the, it's something to consider. But the point is this. When we see of what our parents and grandparents and other people in society were doing back in those days, and relate that to where we are, not necessarily personally, but as a generation, it's very easy to feel like we're on the complete wrong path. Yet we fail to acknowledge that our times are just different. Not necessarily wrong, not better or worse, just different. And that's my opinion. And again, kind of relating to that point, we see ourselves where people feel like, whether it's true or not, they have less of a stake in the world. And what I mean by that is, if you're in a job that's a job, not a career, the kind of job that pays you and you know, maybe you're just stacking shelves, and, you know, come the end of Christmas and January, you maybe just let go. You don't have much of a stake in that company, so you don't feel fulfilled or motivated by your work. Your company may not care about you. When you're in a place where you do not have the relationships in your life, it's very easy to, again, to feel like you just don't have a stake in the world, and like it's not worth it, right? I'm not speaking necessarily for myself or for everybody, but this is a more comprehensive view. I think it does all lead to an identity crisis. So when we kind of compile all the factors that we've spoken about in this video, people these days are having less meaningful relationships, which is a fundamental building block to our beliefs, our motivation, our core happiness as well, is a big thing. So people feel less fulfilled by the connections that they have in their lives. At the same time, they're looking to people from a very, very different time, or listening to people from a very, very different time, saying about where they were in life, when in reality, that world is just not about anymore. And again, I'm not talking about property prices, and I'm not talking about jobs. I'm talking about it all, right? Like I say, relationships are not as strong. Friendships just don't exist as much. Companies seem to care less and less. So it's a different time, and what worked back then does not work now. People find themselves with less to look forward to, in the sense that they feel like, rightly or wrongly, they'll never have a house. A lot of these people do not have anyone to actually impress, and of course we shouldn't be doing what we do for other people, but naturally as humans we are a competitive species. If my friend Rob makes 60,000 a year, maybe I want to make 65 or 70, or at least the same, or at least 10 less, right? Not nothing. If I don't have a friend Rob, or anybody, why bother, right? Who are you trying to impress? Who are you trying to keep up with? Who does it mean anything to? And then again, you compare that to the rate of property increase versus wages. The fact that people have just feeling like they're not going to be getting the value from their careers, from the lifestyle that they were sold. And I think that is the reason why a lot of people in this generation are maybe just having a complete identity crisis. I do understand it, because you get to a point where you've left school, you've left university. What comes next, right? Are you going to get a good corporate job? Or does that as a concept even exist anymore? Can you afford a house from that? Who are you going to meet? Are you actually going to be able to get married and have kids and live happily ever after? Or is it just seeming like none of that's possible? Again, if you were in a society like perhaps that of the past, where, yes, I'm not saying money was or wasn't stronger, but where human connections were, and maybe you had a long-term partner at age 21, 25, well, that's already some stake. That's already some motivation. If you had a large social circle, and some people do still have all of these things, generally these are the people who are doing better for themselves, I've found. But we're looking not at my experience, right? Not at you guys' experience necessarily, as an overall. And as an overall, as a generation, it is worrying. When you feel like you've got nothing to work towards, or your company doesn't care about you, or you've got no friends, it's very hard to find your meaning and your identity in your company. It's very hard to find your meaning and your identity in the friends that you don't have. Obviously, that doesn't even make sense if you think about it. It's very, very hard to find any meaning or identity in the relationship that you don't have. And compile all these things together. Compile the fact that the advice that people are being given by people on the internet, especially older people, maybe parents, all this sort of people, is completely out of date and would not work in today's world. We are now in a position where I think a lot of these young people are just like, right, well, what then? And that, my friends, is the big question. What is the answer? What is the answer? And that's going to be different things for different people. I can't answer it for you guys. I wouldn't want to, because it's a very subjective question. What's going to make me happy won't make you happy. What's going to make you happy might not make me happy. And that's just how it is. But yeah, it's a worrying thing that we're seeing in this generation. And, you know, a lot of people like to dump it on the individuals, saying, oh, this generation's lazy or they don't want to work. The world's set up in a different way. A lot of people haven't adjusted to that, and therefore their mindset is still, well, it's not perhaps where it should be. That's just my experience, guys. Let me know what you think. Thank you. Obviously, leave me a comment if you can, and I'll see you soon.